The effect of exposure on incidence in eye disease. Welcome. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to appraise the concept of risk and assess how exposure and incidence of disease are linked. What affects the incidence of a disease? When we measure incidence, we look at how many people get a disease during a specific time period in a given population at risk. If we see an increase or a decrease in the incidence of a disease, it suggests that something has happened or is going on to cause this. For example, a successful disease intervention, or carrying out screening for a disease, or changes in the population's demographics, or exposure to a causal agent or risk factor. The effect of an intervention on incidence. When xerophthalmia is found in children, it is usually a result of vitamin A deficiency. Supplementing the amount of vitamin A in children's diets is an example of an intervention to address this issue. The intervention will mean fewer cases of xerophthalmia occur. In other words, it will result in a decrease in the incidence of xerophthalmia. What is screening? Screening is the process of identifying apparently healthy people in a population who might be at increased risk of a disease or condition. These people can then be offered information, further tests, and appropriate treatment to reduce the risk and/or any complications arising from the disease or condition. For a disease to be eligible for screening, certain criteria have to be fulfilled. The main one is that the disease can be detected and treated early enough before symptoms appear. This will result in a reduction of risk and a better prognosis. The effect of screening on incidence. Diabetic retinopathy is a common complication of diabetes which can be prevented by screening for the disease. In the United Kingdom, for example, there is a national screening program for diabetic retinopathy, and every diabetic person over the age of 12 is screened every year. Diagnosing and treating any retinopathy before vision is affected means that the incidence of blindness from diabetic retinopathy is decreased. The effect of population demographics on incidence. For example, let's consider age as a population demographic. In many low-income countries, such as Madagascar, there are more young people than older people. In many high-income countries, like Japan, it's the other way round. This difference in the age distribution of the two populations means that the incidence of age-related macular degeneration is much higher in Japan than Madagascar. The effect of exposure on incidence. Incidence is directly related to exposure to a risk factor for a disease or condition. For example, the incidence of myopia is much higher in Chinese children than in Burmese children of the same age group. This is because Chinese children are exposed to near work, resulting in prolonged accommodation at an earlier age. Children in China are introduced to reading at age 3 compared to age 6 in Myanmar. How is exposure related to eye disease? Looking at exposure to a disease or condition helps us answer the question, why are some people at higher risk of a disease than others? Some diseases have a single cause, known as a causal agent. For example, infection by the parasitic worm Onchocerca volvulus and the subsequent release of its microfilariae into the host's bloodstream is the causal agent of river blindness. In this case, disease does not occur without exposure. Other diseases result from exposure to more than one factor. We call these risk factors. Let's look at smoking and the risk of cataract. Heavy smokers have up to 3 times the risk of cataract compared to non-smokers. But this does not mean that someone who has never smoked never gets a cataract. In this case, cataract can occur without exposure to smoking. Poverty is related to a high incidence of blindness. The reasons for this is that poor people are exposed to more risk factors and have more limited access to treatment. We can measure the incidence of disease resulting from exposure to a risk factor in a type of study called a cohort study. In a cohort study, researchers follow a group of people at risk, but disease-free, for a period of time and see who, when, and how many develop the disease. In summary, incidence data allows health workers to see the way in which patterns of a disease within a population or between populations change over time. If there has been an increase or a decrease in the incidence of a disease, this suggests that something must have caused this. A successful disease intervention causes a decrease in incidence. Changes in population demographics in high-income countries means that there is an increase in the incidence of age-related diseases. Exposure to a single agent or multiple risk factors increases the incidence of a disease.